So I want to upgrade the safety on the car pretty much any chance I get to. I have a problem here where when I have got my full safety gear on with my helmet, my Hans device, I typically race the car in a seating position about like this. Well, the problem here is because I'm sitting so far forward to make the pedals work out for me, this is a fairly small area to get out of. I can get out of it, but with all my safety gear on, I either have to be able to tip the steering wheel up or slide the seat back. And I'm not real confident in being able to count on either one of those being able to happen in a pretty hard crash. So to try to make that better, I could move my seating position back, and actually, if I moved it back this far, it would do a couple of things beyond just making such a larger area to get out of the window. It also helped transfer the weight, or my weight anyway, further rearward in the car, which would help move the weight bias from front to rear. But it ends up at a point where I can barely touch the pedals at this point, and the steering wheel being this far away, having your arms out like this is not a good way to go about that as far as having proper leverage for steering. So I'd have to space the steering wheel out, and then I'm probably going to end up in the same problem where it has to move in order to get out. So a quick release is what I plan to do, but there's a problem with that. So I run a Grant wheel, so I picked up the Grant quick release, and for the GM, so it matches the spline that's on the factory column here. And it's this nice little unit. Works quite well. However, with just this short little stud that's splined, it's actually meant to get pressed on and then bolted down, same as the stock style adapter for putting the Grant wheel on. But the problem I run into is where it mounts down here, it's going to be flush with the factory column. Let's see if we can move to a better spot here. And where it ends up being flush with that factory column, this diameter is smaller than this beauty cover, or whatever you want to call it altogether. So it'd be impossible to get a hold of the quick release and it be functional. So my plan is I'll remove all this stuff. We're going to try fitting that up again and see how close, like if this, as long as it doesn't come into contact with the trim ring around the factory column, I should be able to machine a wing to put on here, if you will, where it'll actually extend it out and I can get it up higher and maybe put it out here, so that rather than like trying to fingernail my way into there where it's not going to be a very good quick release anyway, because you're going to really have to think about it and get to it, I can have something where it's much farther out where you can grab a hold of it. Once you get the quick release figured out, the next thing will be if and how much I want to move the seat back. I know with the way this quick release looks like, it should end up going to be spaced out a little bit, but like maybe less than half an inch. I really expected it was going to end up being further out on the steering wheel, but I mean, if we can make it work close to this, it means there's less modifications I'll need to do to the pedals. Like maybe I could just get away with cutting them and re-welding the pedals at a different angle or slightly further out for different positioning. And then I can just utilize what I have. If we get into a situation where I got to put a big honking spacer on here to really move the seat back, then I'm going to be running into the problem where maybe I need to ditch the stock pedals altogether and go to like a Tilton box or any of the other Willwood or whatever pedal box setup. And then the biggest problem becomes the throttle, because it's not that big a deal to separate into a dual master cylinder on the brake system. That actually might be a nice upgrade. Converting over to a hydraulic system on the clutch is not that hard. There's parts available for that. But the throttle is really going to be a problem because of how it bolts up to the firewall. And then if we pull it back, I'm now going to have to figure out a new cable setup, a new pass-through on the firewall, and a few other things that make it more difficult. So if we can maintain something with a quick release where I can have the seat be close to or even only slightly back from where I've been at, we could do some small modifications to work with what we've got. It'll be safer because it'll open up a little more window space. I'll have the quick release, so it's kind of building two things. I'll get a small advantage of shifting the weight back, and at that point, then the only thing I really worry about is the shifter, and I can fabricate whatever to make that work. So now here's where we run into the problem, is this is meant to install right onto here. Something like that. It lines up. I can already see it's going to have a problem with the horn button pass through. We'll have to cut that off. And then it's supposed to slip on there, but it's got to go down all the way, which it won't. But we probably got half an inch that the release section is smaller than the trim. And even if we just extended this out and put some wings on it, this kind of looks like crap. And I really would like to be able to put this beauty ring back over it. So I'm going to have some problems doing that though, because of this is above the splines because an adapter went on below it. And obviously this won't pass through there, plus let everything else go through. So my plan is perhaps I can cut this beauty ring portion out and get it to slip on to here, and it can make the first part of having a winged area, because I really don't care too much what it's going to be like with the steering wheel off. I just would like it to look nice while the steering wheel is on. So at this point we can cut out the rest of this and have it slip over here, but then we'll still need to add on to that. So we're going to go about figuring that out. Now, because of these tight confines, we don't really have a ton of room to work with, but I like that it's keeping the whole assembly fairly short, so I might not have to do anything with my pedals or seating position. I would like to cover up this whole the steering lock thing, just because it's kind of ugly looking, and we also have the problem of like trying to get into here with the steering wheel on. Like, that's just, it don't make sense. So I want to add something so we can take this diameter and at least make that so we have a cover. But then I could probably, from a piece of aluminum, because this is aluminum, so I could either lightly TIG weld it, or could probably, since there's enough surface area here, maybe 3 or 4 very small screws to hold it on. And I can just make it so it fits over this hub, bolts onto the back, and then we could have something that's more out here for a release. And I could even just make it so that's all the way around, so we don't have to worry about, depending on where the steering position is, so you can always get a hold of something. So probably just do that by making a larger diameter, and at that point you won't see this anyway. Although I would like to have it where it's not just at that height out here, because we're still pretty tight, but if it can come up a good half or even 3/4 of an inch right to the, well, we got to make sure we still got enough room to the steering wheel when it's compressed, so we'll have to probably a 1/2 inch at the most so that we have room to pull on it. Came up with a plan. Actually had some sheet aluminum and some round stock and stuff that I used in the press, and I was able to make and kind of hammer this out. So this will be like the release handle that's larger than the trim piece and stuff on the steering, and surprisingly enough I made that out of just a sheet of aluminum. Been trying to learn some of this stuff, so I mean it ain't perfect. It's kind of, you know, scuffed up and drilling holes through right now. And then for the quick release hub, I'm drilling and tapping the rear or the bottom face, and then it will bolt together, and then I'll be able to reach through the steering wheel and be able to activate the release. And I put the different angles and stuff in here to stiffen it up, and that's what gives it some good strength. But I just got finished drilling and tapping this stuff. So this is about how it'll work. Just have 3 screws that'll be able to hold it on from the back. I'll finish scuffing this up, we'll get it painted, and after it dries we'll worry about getting it assembled. I've had way better luck by doing a little more paint prep before just shooting some paint on, and that's about the same as I do for welding. There's getting a little, wiping it down with acetone. So we'll just get to a clean side of this rag here. We can kind of scrub this down through both sides. The reason I use that surfacing scuff pad kind of a thing, I believe it's called a surface conditioner pad or whatever, is just to put these little rough scratch marks in there between those, and then having the surface absolutely clean by wiping down with this acetone makes for a great adhesion surface, and it should make the paint keep from flaking off or peeling or anything like that. We give this a couple of minutes to make sure all the acetone evaporates well, and then we'll go to it. I'll start with the backside, because if I flip it over before it dries or tacks up all the way, it'll only be a couple of spots that you're not even going to see. Sometimes if I want to speed up the drying process, especially in winter time like it is now where everything's so cold and paint takes forever to dry, use a little bit of heat. I'm also done with some parts, like if you got a torpedo style heater in your garage. I have electric heat now, but otherwise for a while there that was all I had. I've used that torpedo heater to set parts in front of it while it's running to get them nice and hot, and then you spray paint onto a hot surface. It actually adheres pretty dang well right off the bat. They're just trying to get heat on it to dry it. I don't want to burn it or anything, but more or less they're just trying to put heat into the part. And I can see the sheen change a bit as the paint dries. It may not dry completely, like if I let it set overnight or something like that, but we're not worried about that. We're just worried about trying to get this dry enough for right now so I can flip it over, get the other side painted, and then maybe let it have a little bit longer drying time. The other thing is when I flip it, the part will already be warm, so the paint should dry a lot faster on a warm part when I shoot the other side. Part's definitely warm. I can see the paint smoking just a little bit here, so but it's still tacky to the touch. Like I said, the cold temperatures don't help it a whole lot. So I'll just give this a minute, let that dry a little bit more before I flip it over, so I'm not flipping it over and then gluing it to the cardboard. While the paint's drying over there, I'll go about how I ended up marking all this out and drilling it. So I started out by figuring out how close in to the edge I wanted to go with being able to drill into this release flange. And then I needed to figure out about 120-degree spacing to use the 3 screws. I happen to have these laying in my kind of, everything drawer. They ended up being 832. And I don't know what these came from. They were probably for like a radio install kit or something like that. But they work perfect for this because they're nice, short. They got a wide flange head on them. So I ended up marking out the 3 spots. I knew I couldn't drill this first and then have any luck of transferring it to the part. But I wanted to know where they were going to end up, so I started out by measuring out from this central hub to where I thought bolt centers should be, and then I could check this hub size versus the hole size because it was about a 1/16 different, and then mark the release flange that we're making. But then I needed to hit center. Well, so to do that, I put the release flange back on top of here. And then I was able to use this ruler and V block so that I could then scribe a line. But then I needed to go 120 degrees, so I have this tool. So I was able to once again put it up against this hub with the other part on it. And then I just had to kind of eyeball and get it close. Obviously it's not perfect. This is only going to line up in one direction. Make sure I had the part sitting on the correct orientation because the bolts, I'm going to be off enough where the bolts are only going to line up in one place anyway. And this is not like it's a part that's getting changed constantly where that's going to be a huge pain in the ass. This is pretty much a one-time thing. So I just wanted to be close. Once I had 3 lines at 120 degrees to make the full circle in spacing, then I took my measurements out from the hole center to where that should be, scribe that onto the aluminum part, and then I was able to center punch, drill that piece, and then use that as a template for this one where I could center punch one hole, and then I drilled and tapped the first hole and bolted it down so that I could then center punch the other 2 holes and know that everything was going to line up. And then as you saw, I finished drilling and tapping that stuff. So now once the paint dries, we'll be able to bolt this up and then have our larger release flange that'll get clear of all the trim pieces. Alright, we're back over here to our part painting. I can touch it, it's all tacked up. Might even be to what you could consider dry. It's not leaving any fingerprints on it. And it's been, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes tops. So we flip it over, spray the other side, and then we'll put a little bit of heat back in it again, and hopefully we'll be able to install this part in about 10-15 minutes. That's what you don't want to do. Got a little too close to it. As you can see, not really a big deal though. I probably could have let it tack for another 30 seconds before I put the heat to it. If you're wondering how I made that really larger release wheel, I just used some scrap round pieces I had laying around to make the different steps in the aluminum. I didn't record any of that because I honestly didn't know if it was going to work at all. I kind of just came up with an idea, like, oh, whatever, I'll give that a try. It started out with this 5-inch round, and I had marked it out, like kind of traced out from the center hole to get as good as I could eyeball centering these, because they're also on opposite sides of it. Center hole wasn't perfect, so I just went about marking that with the Sharpie so that I could line up both and set it up like this. And we put a chamfered edge down and knock the corner off of one side of this thing, this side, knock the edges off of, so that I could press it down a little bit until I got maybe a 1/4 inch step in there. These pipes aren't exactly cut straight. I mean, if you wanted a perfect job, you'd almost have to face these in the lathe, and then you could put a nice bevel on them. None of this stuff is that. This is all just drops from hydraulic cylinders that we make it work. So just had that set up, pressed it down a little bit till I was happy with it. I kind of had to hammer it around with a mallet to get it centered up so it was mostly even all the way around. Like I said, it's not perfect by any means. And then I was able to switch to the outer one, in which case we switched over, and then I flipped the part back over because I wanted to go from the mount flange. If the steering wheel's up, I wanted it to kick down to cover up some of that ugly stuff underneath the hub, and then when it came out a little bit, I wanted it to kick back up and level out, so it would get up away from the column and mostly the turn signal switch and all that stuff, so there's a little more room to grab on that side. And it was just eyeballing it and see what happened, and then I made sure to leave myself a little bit of flange around the outside, because I thought, well, at least I'll hammer that around into like 90 degrees to add some strength. And then I was thinking, well, I don't want to be cutting my fingers or anything on the back side of it either, so I ended up just hammering it all the way around and made like a folded edge. And that actually works out real well, and there's no sharp edges. It still has the strength. Luckily the aluminum I have was able to be shaped like that. And I don't even know what grade it actually is. I know 50 series stuff is what's good for forming, but I think it's 6061 because it welds really nice too. So I kind of got lucky with that. It was just some sheets I had laying around, but as I said, I didn't know if it was going to work, but I had the material. I wasn't afraid of screwing it up. I could always change something later if I needed to. Now I've got all my parts ready to assemble this now. It's only been another 10 minutes or so. The paint's completely dry on this part, so ready to go. Just gotta throw it on here, find which spot all the holes line up. Oh, I got lucky there first try. Should probably put some Loctite on these as well. Not that it's going to end up going anywhere. I mean, if it came loose while it was on the car, it's still going to be there. It's only going to move about a 1/4 inch back farther. But certainly don't want it rattling and slopping around and just being a distraction if that ended up being the case. I'm just going to use a little red Loctite. I don't plan on ever taking this thing apart again. Make sure to get all 3 of them started, because like I said, they're not a perfect alignment, so getting them all started first to make sure that I don't tighten down one or two of them and then can't get the others started. Or throw the screwdriver around like that. Alright. Alright, peel our protective tape off the hub. Kept that on there not to scratch the shiny surface. And get our steering wheel started here. These ones I really got to be careful with, not tightening them up too much because they're flush fit taper style screw. And 5 of them, and if they're not absolutely perfect, tightening one of them can make sure that you're not going to get the others started if it pushes off center a little bit. I don't know how this hub will be. I know I had 2 of them I think that weren't quite perfect on the old hub. Now whether that's the hub or the steering wheel, I'm not really sure. Could be the steering wheel itself, but well, as you put them all down at a similar rate, it'll sit in there nice and look just fine, and it's certainly not going to go anywhere. Being careful not to scratch my spokes as I go. There we go. I can get my hands in here still easily to grab it. So I did kind of want to do more of like a airplane yoke or Formula 1 style steering wheel where it's just the 2 halves. But since that would be where this rotates and it's not going to be locked to the steering wheel in any position, and more importantly, like after a crash, wherever that ends up, because it has more than just a quarter turn one way or the other with the steering setup, I wanted to make sure that I can get a hold of that regardless of what position the steering wheel's at. So let's go see how this looks in the car. Alright. Get it lined up. Oh, there. Alright. Oh, steering wheel's hooked up. I like how I put that dip in there. It's harder to see a kind of ugly spot around the top of the steering column there. With it being black, it doesn't stand out too much as being kind of a weird thing. It's actually small enough. I can, with this down in the driving position, I can still see the gauges and all that without any problems. It should work nice, and I can just pop it off. Now the only thing here I'll have to worry about is parking the car straight and making sure the steering wheel's straight when I go on track. I don't know if there's a way to key it. I mean, I could always either grind out or even just put a little tack weld in there to block one spoke so that I could grind one down in the hub to key it like that, but I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. I'll just figure it out, and you can always make sure your tire's pointed straight and then pop the steering wheel on the correct position. But I don't know, if it's keyed it'd be nice, but it might be a pain in the butt to try to get the sucker on there too then. But we'll see. This is all kind of new for me. Oh, like that. Definitely got to have practice with that. I wonder if it's easier from the outside. Yeah, putting it on might not be that bad, but will certainly be a nice safety upgrade. Okay, we're not done. I just realized that I can unbolt this part, which is just the part adapter to hold the steering wheel, and then I'm left with just this hub. I'm really kind of disappointed I lost my Oldsmobile emblem horn button. Not that I have a horn, but that I like the look of the button on there much better. And can actually use the old adapter. This will give us like a 1-inch, I think, spacer. Yeah, 1-inch. To space the steering wheel out a little bit more, which you know, might move our seating position back a little bit, but more importantly, I get my nice little horn button back if I just bolt this to that. So we'll cannibalize some of the old parts and take the steering wheel back off and make it look better. Alright, I just noticed there's a difference of this larger adapter does not have a recess in it like this one does. The hole, this one looks larger than the hole through this one, so I'm just going to go pop that on the hub quick and make sure that it'll clear the nut that's holding the adapter on. It does clear, so here we go. I mean, it just clears, so be good to go. Tighten this down. Throw our horn button back on. Pop our steering wheel back on. Oh wait, oh, it happens the other way. One of these goes on first. Make that one first. And this can pop in after. Alright, there we have it. Got our nice Oldsmobile horn button back on there. I like the way that looks a whole lot better than just a shiny billet piece that just, it kind of popped a little too much for as much black as we got going on here. This blends with the interior. It, you know, represents the car a little bit more. I just pretty happy I could do that. And with this extra spacer, doesn't look like it's too much of a deal as far as still getting in there to take the quick release off, and I don't know, we'll see what it does as far as positioning the car. Yeah, it's not bad. Actually, the spacer here, I'm about 2 notches farther back on my seating position. The brake pedal still feels good. Shifter's a little bit far away, but I gotta rebuild a new shift handle for that anyway after breaking that at Heartland a couple of times. I don't have the clutch pedal or the throttle hooked up, so it's kind of hard to tell on those, but if the brake pedal feels good, I'm pretty confident that it'll work for the other 2 pedals as well. One thing I did notice before was that if I moved my seating position way back and then we tried to mock up a pedal box in here, that actually if it was a pedal box that mounted to the floor, it actually spaced my feet up enough that the pedals were almost in the right place again anyway. So I think at the worst case scenario I might have to make like a heel plate or something to have the pedals work out, but really won't be able to see any of that until we hook it all back up, and I'm still in the middle of a teardown process for the winter and going through maintenance and rebuilding some stuff. So, but yeah, I'm real happy with how this turned out. Got my looks, I got my quick release, a little bit farther seating back, probably end up somewhere about right here. So it actually gives me a little more window to get out versus before I was here for driving. So it doesn't look like much, but I mean that little bit's going to help. And then especially with me trying to, have a Hans device on and trying to climb out like this, I start getting pinched in a lot of places real quick. So the difference being, if I can pop that loose, now I got more room to try to get my butt out. So